The gas station lights flickered weakly beneath a sky that was slowly sinking into darkness. Brielle Hayes stood motionless, watching the taillights of her husband's car grow smaller and smaller until they disappeared at the end of a lonely stretch of highway in the New Jersey suburbs. 3 battered old backpacks lay scattered on cracked concrete. Her 3 children clung to her, their young faces soaked with tears. The youngest, Theo, only 4 years old, gripped her leg and asked the question that shattered Brielle's heart. "Mom, why did Dad take all our money and then leave?" Garrett Voss had driven them for hours from Brooklyn. He stopped at this deserted gas station, climbed out, yanked the wallet from Brielle's hand, emptied every last bill, then tossed it back at her. $23. That was all he left behind. "I owe them $200,000, Garrett said, his voice cold as if he'd never loved the woman standing in front of him. "You and the kids are nothing but dead weight. Figure it out." Then he snatched Brielle's phone and slammed it hard against the concrete. The screen shattered. Their only link to the outside world broke into pieces. Garrett got back in the car and drove away without looking back even once. No money, no phone, no plan, no one to call. Just a 28-year-old mother and 3 small children trembling with fear, abandoned in the middle of nowhere. While the November cold slowly seeped into their bones, the woman working the station had just told them the place would be closing soon. After that, Brielle and the kids would be completely alone in the dark, in a cold sharp enough to cut straight through skin and muscle. With nowhere to go, Brielle's hands shook as she tried to hold herself together in front of Ronan, 8 years old, and Lila, 6. But inside, panic was clawing at her chest. She had $23 in her wallet, a phone that was nothing but shattered glass, and 3 children staring up at her with absolute trust, waiting for their mother to say everything would be okay. Ronan slipped off his thin jacket and draped it over Theo, who was shivering uncontrollably. The boy tried to look brave, but his eyes were red from holding back tears. "Mom, is Dad coming back?" Lila asked, her voice trembling. Brielle wanted to lie just to spare her child the pain, but she'd promised herself she would never lie to them. "No, sweetheart. Dad isn't coming back." This was the abyss. This was the moment everything collapsed all the way down. But before we continue this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt completely abandoned, like there was no one left to lean on? Have you ever wondered whether miracles are real? If this story touches your heart, comment below about a time someone showed you unexpected kindness. Your story might inspire someone else who's desperate for hope. Now, let's continue. Late at night, when Brielle was almost exhausted from cold and worry, the sound of engines rolled in from far away. Not one vehicle. Three glossy black SUVs turned into the gas station, lining up like an escort. Headlights swept through the darkness in a harsh white glare. Doors opened. Men in black suits stepped out, their posture cold, their presence dangerous. Brielle pulled her children close, her heart pounding. She'd heard enough stories about gangs, traffickers, criminals who preyed on women and children with nowhere to turn. She tightened her grip on Ronan's hand, shielding Lila and Theo behind her. Then the middle SUV door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, his black hair slicked back, his face sharply cut with a hard-defined jaw. A long black wool coat hung over a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit. But what caught Brielle first were his eyes. Steel gray, icy, carrying a kind of power and danger that couldn't be mistaken. Everything about him screamed 2 words: absolute power. He glanced at the station, now closed, and frowned slightly. Then his gaze settled on Brielle, and the 3 children huddled beneath the awning. One of the suited men started toward them, but the man lifted a hand, signaling him to stop. He approached on his own, slowly, keeping his distance so he wouldn't frighten her. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, his voice low and cold. Brielle swallowed hard, her voice shaking. "Please, sir, don't hurt my children. You can take anything you want, but please don't touch the kids." The man's brow tightened. His eyes moved over the 3 children, trembling from cold and fear. Theo started coughing, a heavy, wheezing cough from a child with asthma hit by the cold. I don't hurt women or children, he said slowly, his voice still cold but no longer cutting. How long have you been here? Since early evening, something shifted in his gray eyes. He looked at the worn, old red sweater Brielle was wearing, red like the color his mother used to wear, then looked again at the 3 children clinging to her. Victor, he said, and suddenly his voice carried an authority that couldn't be challenged. Get a doctor to the hotel. The little one needs to be checked. Brielle shook her head in panic. I don't have any money. I didn't ask whether you have money. The man cut in, his eyes locking onto hers. I said, get in the car. And this was the deciding moment. Accept help from a man who was clearly dangerous, or refuse out of fear and let her children endure the cold, the hunger, the sickness through the endless night. Brielle looked at Theo, coughing until he gagged. She looked at Lila crying without sound. She looked at Ronan trying to be brave even though he was only 8 years old. She remembered the promise she'd made to herself. Her children came first, even if it cost her everything. All right, she said, her voice breaking. We'll go. Please, please keep my children safe. The man nodded, brief and firm, a gesture that felt like a vow. His name was Damian Blackwood, the most powerful mafia boss in the entire Northeast, the man the whole underworld feared. And from that moment on, Brielle Hayes' life would never be the same again. If you want to know what happens next, hit like to support this video. Share this story with anyone who needs a little inspiration, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next emotional story. Brielle lifted Theo into the vehicle while Ronan gripped Lila's hand so tightly it looked like he was afraid to let go, and the 2 of them followed their mother with tense faces. Inside the SUV, it was far warmer than the biting cold outside, but the air felt heavy in a different way. Glossy black leather seats, the scent of a new car mixed with expensive cologne, and a frightening silence from the men around them. Damian sat across from her, his steel gray eyes turned toward the window as if his mind was fixed on something far away. Beside him, the man named Victor sat with a face like stone, his gaze sliding toward Brielle and the children now and then, his suspicion completely undisguised. Boss, Victor said at last, his voice low and careful. We don't know anything about her. Damian didn't even turn his head. I know enough. Victor went quiet. But the way he looked at Brielle made it clear he didn't agree. Brielle felt that distrust pressing in on her, but she didn't have the energy to care. Theo's coughing was getting worse, deep fits echoing in the hush of the car, his small chest rising and falling with painful effort. She held her son tighter, one hand rubbing his back, trying to help him breathe. Lila pressed close to her mother, big eyes scanning the interior with a mix of fear and curiosity. She leaned in and whispered, Mom? Is that man bad? Brielle didn't know how to answer. She only squeezed her daughter's hand and murmured, You're safe. I'm going to keep you safe. Across from them, Ronan sat rigidly upright, his hands clenched into fists on his thighs. The 8-year-old was trying to look brave, but Brielle saw him tremble slightly every time Victor's eyes swept over them. Even scared, Ronan still positioned himself like a shield, as if his small body could somehow protect his mother and his brother and sister. The convoy cut through the night, streetlights sliding across the windows in blurred, ghostly streaks. Brielle didn't know where they were going, and she didn't dare ask. She only knew that anywhere was better than that deserted gas station in the dead of a freezing winter night. Theo coughed again, harder this time, the fit dragging on until it looked like he could barely catch a breath. Brielle panicked, patting his back, her voice shaking. Baby, breathe. Breathe. Slow down. Okay, slow down. Damian turned. His gray eyes settled on Theo, struggling for air, and then he pulled out his phone and spoke in clipped, final words. The doctor will be there as soon as we arrive. Have a backup breathing machine ready. Brielle looked at him, and something strange surged up in her chest. Something she couldn't name. Fear, gratitude, confusion, all of it tangled together. The convoy stopped in front of a high-rise building blazing with light against the late-night darkness. A five-star hotel, the kind Brielle had only ever seen on television or in glossy magazines. The glass front reflected the city lights. The revolving door gleamed with gold, and uniformed staff were already waiting, as if they'd known the moment this group would arrive. Damian stepped out first, then turned back and opened the door for Brielle and the children. A small gesture, but it startled her. She carried Theo, who was wheezing with every breath, while Ronan and Lila stayed tight at her sides, and they walked into the lobby beneath chandeliers that glittered like 1,000 stars. Everyone inside lowered their heads as Damian passed. No one asked questions. No one stared at the exhausted woman and the 3 disheveled children beside the powerful man. They simply fell silent and moved out of the way. Lila tipped her head back to stare at the soaring ceiling, her eyes wide. "Mom, is this a palace?" Brielle felt tears burn behind her eyes. Only hours ago, she'd believed her children were going to sleep outside in the cold. Now they were standing in a place so luxurious she couldn't trust what she was seeing. Damian led them to a private elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. When the door slid shut, he looked at Brielle and spoke, his voice still cold, but not as sharp as before. "The doctor will be here soon. You and your children will stay here tonight. Safe." Brielle nodded, her throat tight. She wanted to say thank you, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she held Theo closer and prayed silently that getting into that car tonight hadn't been a mistake. The elevator doors opened, and Brielle stepped into a room she'd never imagined she'd ever set foot in. The suite stretched out before her, like a dream with soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow, and enormous glass windows revealing the city glittering below in the night. Thick carpet softened the floors. A deep navy velvet sofa sat in front of a fireplace crackling with flame, and 2 doors led to 2 separate bedrooms. Lila blurted out, "Mom, this is a princess's house." Ronan stayed quiet as he looked around, his face still tight with tension, but unable to hide his amazement. Theo, cradled in Brielle's arms, was still wheezing, his eyes dull with exhaustion. Soon after, the suite door opened and a middle-aged man in a white coat walked in, carrying a black leather bag. He dipped his head to Damian, then moved quickly to Brielle. "I am Dr. Hale. Let me see the child." Brielle sat Theo down on the sofa, worry choking her chest. Dr. Hale examined him carefully, listened to his lungs, checked his heartbeat, and asked Brielle about Theo's history of asthma. He worked quickly, but thoroughly, and after a short while, he straightened with a reassuring expression. "He's having an acute asthma flare from being exposed to cold air for too long. I'm prescribing an inhaler and an oral medication. He needs to take it tonight and continue for a week." He turned to Damian. "I'll leave the prescription and detailed instructions." Damian nodded. "Thank you. The medication will be brought up soon, Doctor." Hale left, and almost immediately there was a knock at the door. A hotel staff member rolled in a food cart, and the aroma filled the room. Steaming chicken soup, crisp toasted bread, pasta with tomato sauce, and 3 glasses of warm milk for the children. Lila and Ronan stared at the food with bright eyes, swallowing hard, not daring to touch anything until Brielle nodded her permission. They ate in silence. But it was the silence of children who'd been hungry too long, focused on every bite. Lila slurped her soup. Ronan tried to eat slowly, but couldn't hide how desperately he wanted it. And Theo, even exhausted, finished the warm milk Brielle fed him. Brielle could barely eat at all. Her throat tightened as she watched her children. Just this morning, they'd been in their cramped, shabby apartment in Brooklyn, and now they were sitting in a suite that cost more than her entire yearly income. The world had flipped too fast, too violently, and Brielle didn't know what she was supposed to feel. When the children were done, she led them into the bedroom. All 3 climbed onto the king-size bed with its spotless white sheets, their eyelids drooping almost instantly. Lila held tight to Ronan's hand. Theo curled beside his mother, and within minutes, all 3 were asleep. Brielle rose quietly, walked back into the living area, and went straight into the bathroom. She closed the door, leaned her back against the icy marble wall, and began to sob. Tears poured out without control, strangled hiccups echoing in the small space. She cried from fear, from exhaustion, from humiliation, and from gratitude. Every emotion she'd been forcing down for hours burst loose all at once, impossible to hold back. She didn't know how long she cried. When Brielle splashed water on her face and stepped back out, she startled to see Damian still there, standing by the window, looking out over the city. He turned at the sound of her, his gray eyes sliding over her swollen face, but he didn't mention it. Instead, he walked closer and held out a brand new phone, the latest smartphone model, still sealed in its box. "My number's already saved in it," he said, his voice low and even. "If you need anything, you call me." Brielle looked at the phone, then at him, her mind spinning. "Why are you doing all of this? You don't even know who we are." Damian was silent for a long moment. His steel gray eyes held hers. And in that instant, Brielle caught a glimpse of something buried beneath the cold exterior. Pain, loneliness, or maybe the memory of something he'd lost a long time ago. "Because no one deserves to be abandoned in the cold like that," he said slowly. "Especially children." Then he turned and walked toward the door. Before he left, he paused and added without looking back, "Get some rest. I'll come back tomorrow morning." The door closed, and Brielle stood alone in the lavish suite, the new phone in her hand, and tears rose again. But this time, in those tears, there was the faintest thread of hope, fragile as a candle flame in the wind, but still burning. Early sunlight slipped through the heavy curtains and woke Brielle from a short sleep that was still the deepest she'd had in months. She opened her eyes and needed a few seconds to remember where she was. The luxurious suite, the soft bed, and her 3 children still sleeping soundly beside her. It wasn't a dream. It was all real. Theo looked much better after the medicine last night. His breathing was steady now, no longer carrying that terrifying wheeze from the day before. Lila was curled up like a small kitten, and Ronan lay on his back with one hand still resting on his sister's stomach as if he was protecting her even in sleep. Brielle slipped out of bed and stepped into the living area. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw Damian already sitting on the sofa, a cup of coffee in his hand, as if he'd been there for a long time. Victor sat beside him, still wearing the same cold expression and watchful eyes. "You're up," Damian said, setting the coffee down as he rose. "How are the kids?" "Better." "Theo slept well," Brielle answered, her voice still a little rough from waking. She didn't know how to behave around this man, the one who'd saved them, and yet still frightened her. Damian nodded and motioned for her to sit. A hotel staff member entered with a cart loaded with breakfast, arranged everything on the table, then quietly left. Pancakes, fried eggs, sausage, fresh fruit, and squeezed orange juice, enough to feed a whole family until they were full. "I have a proposal for you," Damian said, going straight to it without softening a single word. "I own a small house in Hoboken, 3 bedrooms, close to a good school. You and your children can stay there." Brielle opened her mouth to respond, but Damian kept speaking. "I also own an Italian restaurant called Fiorella. You can work there, starting as a waitress. The pay is enough to live on. There's health insurance and flexible hours, so you can take your kids to school and pick them up. The children will be enrolled in the public school near the house." Brielle sat perfectly still. Unable to find her voice, she stared at the man in front of her, trying to understand why he was doing any of this. And then the pieces began sliding into place in her mind. The glossy black convoy, the men in suits with guns hidden beneath their jackets, the way everyone lowered their heads when Damian walked through, the way Victor called him boss. "I know who you are," Brielle said, calmer than she expected her own voice to be. "I'm not stupid. I saw the way those men looked at you. I saw the gun under their suit. You're Mafia." Victor shifted forward slightly, but Damian lifted a hand, signaling him to stay put. Damian's gray eyes held Brielle's with something that looked like respect. "You pay attention," he said, not denying it. "Yes, I'm not a good man by the world's definition. I do things the law doesn't allow. I have enemies, and I've got blood on my hands." A chill crawled up Brielle's spine, but she didn't break eye contact. "But I have principles," Damian continued, his voice low and certain. "My first principle, my most important one, is that I never harm women and children. Never. That's a line I don't cross, no matter what happens. He stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city waking up below. My mother was once a woman who was abandoned, he said, his voice dropping. She raised me and my sister alone in the slums, working 3 jobs a day so we wouldn't go hungry. I swore that if I ever had power, I'd never let women and children suffer what my mother suffered. He turned back to Brielle. You can refuse my offer. I'll give you money and let you go. But where will you go? Back to the husband who left you in the cold at night. Back to an apartment that man has surely already run from because of his debts. Brielle lowered her gaze. He was right. She had nowhere to go, no one to lean on. I'm not asking you to trust me, Damian said. I'm only asking you to give me the chance to prove it. This help comes with no strings. You can leave whenever you want. The bedroom door opened and the 3 children wandered out, their eyes still heavy with sleep. Lila spotted the breakfast and lit up. Pancakes. Brielle looked at her children, then back at Damian. In those cold, gray eyes, she didn't see lies. She saw a dangerous man. Yes, but also a man trying to do the right thing in his own way. Give me time to think, she said. Damian nodded. You've got all day today. Brielle sat down at the table with her children, but she didn't eat. She only watched the 3 of them, absorbed in the breakfast laid out in front of them. Lila cut a tiny piece of pancake, drowned it in syrup, then lifted it to her mouth, her eyes lighting up as if she just tasted the best thing in the world. Ronan tried to eat slowly, but he still couldn't hide the hunger in his face whenever he glanced at the plate of sausage that was still piled high. Theo, even though he was still a little tired, could hold his spoon on his own and scoop up bites of fried egg, his cheeks noticeably pinker than they'd been the night before. Mom. Lila looked up at Brielle, syrup still clinging to her mouth. This is the best breakfast I've ever had. That innocent sentence sliced straight into Brielle's heart. She remembered the mornings in their old apartment when she'd had to split a single packet of instant noodles between 3 children because Garrett had taken every last dollar to gamble. She remembered the nights her kids were hungry, crying, and all she could do was hold them because she couldn't fix it. She remembered the way Garrett looked at them with cold disgust, calling them a burden. And now, a stranger, a Mafia boss she'd met less than a day ago, was giving her children the very things their own father had never given them. Brielle glanced toward Damian. He was standing by the window speaking on the phone in Italian, his voice low and commanding. Victor sat in the corner, still wearing that constant, guarded expression. This was the underworld, a world of violence and danger. Brielle knew that. But when she looked back at her children, at Lila's smile, at Ronan cutting pieces of sausage for Theo, she knew what her answer was. She had no choice. Or maybe she did have a choice, and she was choosing her children. When Damian ended the call and turned back, Brielle was already on her feet, waiting. I accept your offer, she said, her voice clear and final. The house, the job, the school for my children. I accept all of it. Damian nodded, his face unchanged as if he'd known this answer was coming, but I have a condition. Brielle continued, lifting her chin and meeting his eyes head on. This isn't charity. I'll pay you back every single cent. The rent, the hotel, the doctor, everything. It might take a year, 2 years, or 10, but I'll pay it back. I don't want to owe you anything. The room went still. Victor raised his eyebrows, clearly surprised by how direct she was. But it was Damian's reaction that truly caught Brielle off guard. He smiled. It was the first smile Brielle had seen on that cold face. Not a wide one, just the faint lift of his mouth, but it softened the sharp lines of him and took a little of the ice out of his gray eyes. You've got pride, Damian said, and there was a trace of warmth in his voice that Brielle hadn't heard before. I respect that. He stepped closer by a single pace. All right. If you want to repay the debt, I'll let you repay it, but don't rush. You work hard. You take good care of your children. That's enough. Brielle nodded, feeling as if a weight the size of the world had just slid off her shoulders. She didn't know what the future would bring. She didn't know how dangerous the world was that she was stepping into. But at least her children would have a roof, food, and school. That was all that mattered. Lila ran over and wrapped her arms around Brielle's legs. "Mom, are we going to have a new home?" Brielle bent down and held her daughter close, tears rising fast. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to have a new home." That afternoon, a black SUV drove Brielle and her children to Hoboken. When the vehicle stopped in front of the house, Brielle had to look twice, then look again, just to make sure there hadn't been some mistake. It was a small, charming home with a pale blue front, white-trimmed windows with flower boxes hanging outside, and a low wooden fence surrounding a neat patch of bright green grass. It looked like the houses Brielle had seen in American movies, the kind of home she'd never dared to dream she might live in. Lila was the first to jump out. She ran circles around the yard, touching every flower she could reach, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Mom, there's a swing." "There's a swing, Mom!" Ronan climbed out more slowly, but his eyes brightened when he spotted the big tree in the corner of the yard. Its branches thick and leafy, like an invitation for children to climb. Theo held Brielle's hand, still weak from being sick, yet rising on tiptoe so he could see better. Inside, it was even more beautiful than the outside. Shining hardwood floors, a spacious living room with a brand new sofa, a modern kitchen with a refrigerator stocked with food. And what moved Brielle most of all was what she found upstairs. 3 bedrooms, 3, 1 for each child. "Do I get this room, Mom?" Lila asked, standing in the middle of a bedroom painted a soft, pale pink, with a small bed dressed in princess sheets, a bookshelf, and a desk by the window. She spun in a circle with her arms wide like she wanted to hug the entire room. "It's mine, just mine, Mom." Brielle nodded, her throat tightening. In the old apartment, all 3 children had slept together on a worn-out mattress shoved into a corner of the living room. They'd never had space of their own, never had a place to keep toys, never had a wall for drawings, and now each of them had a room that was complete, warm, and safe. Ronan's room was painted blue with shelves for books and a larger desk. The 8-year-old stood there in silence for a long moment, then turned to his mother and asked in a voice so small it sounded like he was afraid of the answer. "Mom, do we really get to stay here? No one's going to make us leave, right?" Brielle knelt until she was eye level with her son. "No one's going to make us leave, sweetheart. This is our home." The first week passed like a dream. Brielle enrolled the children in the public school just 2 blocks away. Ronan entered 3rd grade. Lila started 1st grade and Theo began preschool. Every morning, Brielle walked all 3 of them to school, watching them run through the gates with new backpacks on their shoulders, and she had to fight back tears because she was so happy. And Brielle began working at Fiorella, an upscale Italian restaurant in the center of the city. On her first day, she was so nervous her hands trembled as she balanced the serving tray. But Mrs. Ramirez, the restaurant manager, quickly chased away her fear. Mrs. Ramirez was a woman around 55, full-figured with silver hair pinned up in a bun and eyes that were sharp but warm. She'd worked at Fiorella for over 20 years and knew every corner of the place. "Don't worry," she told Brielle in a steady voice. "Everybody starts from 0. Your job is to learn, and my job is to teach you. We're going to do fine." Under Mrs. Ramirez's guidance, Brielle learned how to carry plates with confidence, memorized the menu, and learned how to handle demanding customers. The work was hard, but Brielle didn't complain. Every day she arrived early and left late, determined to prove she deserved this chance. Her coworkers were curious at first about her, the mysterious woman the boss himself had brought in. But when they saw how hard-working and humble Brielle was, they slowly accepted her as part of the Fiorella family. Each night, when she returned to the little house in Hoboken and saw warm light glowing from the windows and heard her children's laughter spilling out, Brielle felt as if she'd been given a second life. A new life was beginning, and even though she didn't know what the future would hold, she was determined to hold on to this chance with both hands. Months had passed since they moved into the new house. Lila and Theo adapted quickly to their new life. Lila had made friends with a neighborhood girl named Emily, and the 2 of them played on the swing in the yard almost every afternoon. Theo loved preschool, coming home each day with scribbled drawings and rambling stories that never quite had a beginning or an end, all about the kids in his class. His asthma was under good control too, thanks to the medication and the clean air in this quiet neighborhood. But Ronan was different. The 8-year-old still went to school every day, still did his homework, still helped his mother watch his brother and sister. But Brielle could tell something was wrong. Ronan startled easily at loud noises. He never fell asleep before Brielle came home. Even though Brielle had asked Mrs. Ramirez to arrange for her to leave work earlier, and every time a car stopped in front of the house, Ronan would rush to the window like he was keeping watch for something. Ronan's homeroom teacher called Brielle after a few weeks of school. She said Ronan was a strong student, but he seemed unusually withdrawn and anxious. During recess, he often sat alone instead of playing with the other children. And once, when another boy accidentally slammed the classroom door, Ronan dropped flat to the floor as if he was trying to hide from something. Brielle knew the reason. She knew it better than anyone. For 8 years, Ronan had seen far too much of what a child should never have to see. He'd watched Garrett hit his mother. He'd heard the screaming in the middle of the night. More than once, he'd put himself between his little brother and sister and their father when Garrett came home drunk and raging. Ronan had learned to recognize danger. He'd learned how to hide. He'd learned how to stay silent so he wouldn't make his father angrier. Those lessons had carved themselves deep into his mind, and now, even though he was safe, he couldn't escape them. One night, after Lila and Theo were fast asleep, Brielle was sitting in the living room going through bills when Ronan came down the stairs. He was wearing blue pajamas, holding his pillow in his arms, his eyes still wide awake even though it was late. "You can't sleep, sweetheart?" Brielle asked, patting the empty space beside her on the sofa. Ronan sat down and stayed quiet for a long time. Then he asked, his voice so small it sounded like he was afraid someone might hear, "Mom, is Uncle Damian going to hit you like Dad did?" It felt like someone squeezed Brielle's heart until she couldn't breathe. She turned to her son and saw his eyes filled with worry and fear, the eyes of a child who had witnessed too much violence. "No, sweetheart," she said, pulling Ronan into her arms and holding him tight. "Uncle Damian isn't going to hit me. He's just someone helping us." "But Dad used to be nice to you too," Ronan whispered, his voice shaking. "At the beginning, he was nice, and then he hit you. I'm scared. Uncle Damian will be the same." Tears spilled over Brielle's eyes. She held her son even tighter, feeling his small body trembling against her. "I promise you," she said, her voice breaking but steady. "No one is ever going to hit me again. No one is ever going to hit you again. I won't ever let that happen. We left your father, and we aren't going back to that life. Do you hear me?" Ronan nodded, pressing his face into his mother's chest. He cried for the first time since the night at the gas station. The tears he'd been holding back for so long finally poured out. Brielle sat there holding her son until he fell asleep on the sofa. She looked at Ronan's innocent face in sleep and swore to herself that she would do whatever it took to heal the wounds inside his heart. No matter how long it took, no matter what it cost, her children deserved happiness, and she would fight to give it to them. Months into working at Fiorella, Brielle noticed something strange. Damian Blackwood, the powerful Mafia boss the entire underworld feared, came to the restaurant far more often than she'd expected. He always sat in the same place, the shadowed corner table near the window facing the street where he could watch the whole dining room without drawing attention. Victor and a few of his men were always with him, but they sat at a separate table close enough to protect him far enough to leave Damian his own space. Every time Damian came in, Brielle could feel his eyes on her. Not the kind of look that picked her apart or judged her, but something harder to name, as if he was watching to see whether she was all right. At first it made her uneasy, but little by little she grew used to his presence, and eventually she even felt safer knowing he was there. Then the conversations began. The first time was late at night after the restaurant had closed when Brielle was helping Mrs. Ramirez clean up. Damian was still in his usual corner, an espresso that had gone cold long ago, sitting in front of him. When Brielle passed by to wipe down the table, he spoke without warning. "How are your children?" Brielle stopped, surprised. "They're doing well. Theo isn't coughing anymore. Lila loves her new school. And Ronan, she hesitated. That boy has a problem, Damian said, and it wasn't a question. Brielle nodded, not trying to hide it. He's been through a lot. He needs time to heal. Damian went quiet for a long moment. His gray eyes turned toward the window. I understand. I was a child like that too. That one sentence opened the door to everything that came after. A few nights each week after closing, Damian would stay and they would talk. Sometimes it was only short questions about work or everyday life. Sometimes the conversations ran longer, deeper, touching places neither of them could easily share with anyone else. Slowly, Brielle began to see the person behind Damian's cold exterior. He liked to read, especially Dante's poetry. He hated American coffee and only drank Italian-style espresso. He had a sister named Elena who lived in the suburbs, and he loved his mother more than anyone in the world. One night when the restaurant was empty and only the dim light from the bar remained, Damian told Brielle about her. My mother's name was Maria, he said, his voice lower than usual. She was the strongest woman I ever knew. She came to America from Sicily when she was only 18, with nothing but a suitcase and a dream of a better life. Brielle sat across from him, listening in silence. She met my father in New York. He was handsome, charming, and he said all the right sweet things. She loved him like she'd lost her mind. Damian paused, and his gray eyes darkened. But after they married, he changed. He hit her often, brutally. I grew up with the sound of screaming and fists every night. Brielle felt her heart tighten. The story was painfully familiar. When I was 10, my father left with another woman. No goodbye, no money, nothing. My mother raised me and my sister alone in the slums. She worked 3 jobs a day doing laundry, washing dishes, sewing for people. Her hands were calloused and cracked, but she never complained. Damian lowered his gaze to the coffee that had long since gone cold. I swore I'd give my mother the best life. I did whatever it took to get money, to get power, so no one would ever dare touch my family again. And I did it. His voice tightened. I bought her the most beautiful mansion, hired people to take care of her, took her traveling all over the world. She finally got to live in happiness. And then what? Brielle asked softly. And then she died, Damian said, his voice sounding strangled. Cancer. They found it too late. She died years ago in my arms. Silence swallowed the room. Brielle didn't know what to say. She only knew that in that moment, the man in front of her wasn't a terrifying mafia boss anymore. He was just a son missing his mother. Do you know why I stopped at that gas station that night? Damian asked, lifting his head, his gray eyes holding a pain so deep it seemed endless. Because you were wearing a red sweater, dark red, the exact same color my mother used to wear. And I saw her in you, a mother trying to protect her children at any cost. Tears slipped down Brielle's face. Now she understood. She understood why he'd helped them, why he cared about her children, why he waited with patience and asked for nothing in return. Damian Blackwood hadn't saved Brielle and her kids because he wanted something. He'd saved them because he was saving his own childhood. After that night, everything began to change. Damian was no longer just a distant benefactor. He started showing up in their lives more often, more naturally, as if he belonged there. The first time was at Lila's school performance. She'd been chosen to sing with the choir and had been excited all week. Brielle asked to leave work early so she could watch. And as she searched for a seat in the crowded auditorium, she froze when she saw Damian already there. He sat in the back row wearing his usual black suit with Victor standing guard by the door. Damian gave Brielle a small nod when she spotted him, then turned back toward the stage as if his being there was the most normal thing in the world. Up on stage, Lila saw both her mother and Uncle Damian. She waved wildly and sang louder than any other child. After the performance, she ran straight to Damian before she even reached her mother. Uncle Damian, you came to hear me sing. Damian bent down and awkwardly patted her head. You sang beautifully, just 4 simple words. But Lila beamed as if she'd received the greatest praise of her life. With Ronan, Damian chose a different approach. He didn't try to charm him or soften him with sweet words. Instead, he brought a chess set. "Do you want to learn how to play?" he asked Ronan one weekend afternoon. The 8-year-old looked at the board with curiosity, then nodded. They sat across from each other in the living room while Damian patiently explained each piece, each move. Ronan learned fast, with a seriousness that was surprising. "Chess teaches you to think before you act," Damian said. "It teaches you that every decision has consequences, and most importantly, it teaches you that even when you lose, you can still learn something." Brielle stood in the kitchen doorway watching them play, and she realized this was the first time she'd seen Ronan truly relax in front of a grown man. And Theo, 4 years old with big round eyes and an easy smile, won Damian over in his own way. Damian bought him a toy ambulance, the kind with a siren and flashing lights. Theo was enchanted and announced that when he grew up, he would be a doctor who saved people. "Uncle Damian, if you get sick, you call me." "Okay, I'll fix you," he said solemnly, pressing a toy stethoscope against Damian's chest. The powerful Mafia boss sat still and let a 4-year-old examine him. And Brielle could have sworn she saw the faintest lift at the corner of his mouth. Then one day, Lila came home with a drawing from school. "Teacher said to draw our family," she told Brielle proudly. Brielle looked at the picture and felt her heart stop. There were 5 people in the drawing. A brown-haired woman as the mother, 3 children as Ronan, Lila, and Theo, and a tall man dressed in black standing beside the mother, labeled in Lila's messy handwriting. "Uncle Damian." "I drew Uncle Damian because he's our family," Lila explained innocently. "He gives us a house, he gives us food, and he's nice to us." Brielle didn't know what to say. She stared at the drawing, at the image of Damian standing beside her as part of the family, and something strange rose in her chest. She thought about the past months, about the way Damian quietly cared for them, about the late-night conversations in the empty restaurant, about the gray eyes that carried pain and loneliness, about the rare smile that appeared when he played with the children. And she realized her feelings were changing. It wasn't only gratitude anymore. It was something deeper, warmer, and also far more frightening. Brielle tried to push the thought away. Damian was Mafia. He was dangerous. She had just escaped a terrible marriage. She shouldn't. She couldn't let herself fall into another relationship, especially not with a man like him. But the heart never listens to reason. And every time Damian appeared, every time those gray eyes settled on her, Brielle felt herself slowly drowning in a feeling she couldn't control. Everything fell apart. On a night near the end of the 4th month, Brielle was working the evening shift at Fiorella, and the restaurant was busier than usual because a large party had booked an event. She didn't finish until close to closing time, and as she was getting ready to leave, she realized she'd forgotten her knitted scarf in the staff changing room behind the restaurant. It was the scarf Lila had made for her, ugly and lopsided, but Brielle cherished it more than anything. She turned back to get it, heading through the back door that led to the storage area and the parking lot. The late night was quiet, only the sound of cold wind sliding through the dark alley. And then she heard it, a low, pained groan, the dull thud of fists, and Damian's voice, cold and terrifying in a way she'd never heard before. Brielle knew she should turn around, should pretend she hadn't heard a thing, but her legs wouldn't listen. She moved toward the warehouse where light spilled through a cracked open door, and she saw it. Damian stood in the middle of the warehouse, his suit jacket already off, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. In front of him, a man was tied to a chair, his face bruised, blood running from his nose and mouth. Victor stood nearby with an iron bar in his hand. 2 other men kept watch in the corner. "I'll ask one last time." Damian's voice was ice. "Who did you sell information to?" The man in the chair sobbed and begged. "Boss, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. They threatened my family." "You think I'm going to believe that?" Damian said, bending down, grabbing the man by the hair and yanking his face upward. "You worked for me for years. I treated you like a brother, and you betrayed me for money." The man cried harder, but Damian didn't soften. He signaled to Victor, and the iron bar came down. The sound of bone snapping cut through the air. A scream tore the night open. Brielle clapped a hand over her mouth, her body shaking beyond control. She stumbled back one step, and her foot hit an empty soda can. The metallic clatter rang out in the silent night. Damian turned his head. His gray eyes met Brielle's horrified stare through the narrow gap of the door. Time stopped for a moment that stretched into forever. Then Brielle ran. She ran like she'd never run in her life, tearing through the dark alley, bursting out onto the main road, and jumping into the first taxi she could flag down. The whole ride home, she trembled nonstop. Images of blood, the iron bar, the battered face, and Damian's cold eyes spinning over and over in her mind. When she got home, Brielle locked the door, checked every window, then rushed upstairs to her children's room. All three were sleeping soundly, their faces peaceful, unaware of the storm inside their mother. She sat on Ronan's bed, pulled all three children into her arms, and cried without making a sound. The man who gently taught Ronan chess, the man who patiently sat still while Theo examined him with a toy stethoscope, the man who'd saved them in the freezing night, the man she was slowly falling in love with, was the same man she'd just watched order someone's bones broken without a flicker of emotion. Brielle had known Damian was Mafia. She'd known from the beginning, but knowing and seeing it with her own eyes were two completely different things. She could accept the abstract idea of a crime boss, but could she accept a man capable of that kind of violence being close to her children? Ronan had asked if Uncle Damian would hit her the way Dad did. She'd said no. But after tonight, could she still be sure? That night, Brielle couldn't sleep. She lay holding her children, staring at the ceiling, fighting with herself. Part of her wanted to run, to take the kids far away from this dangerous world. But where would she go? She had no money, no family, nowhere to turn. And another part of her, the part she didn't want to admit existed, still remembered Damian's eyes when he spoke about his mother, still remembered the rare smile he gave the children, still believed that man would never hurt them, but was belief enough when she just witnessed how ruthless he could be. Brielle didn't have an answer. She only knew that from this night on, nothing would ever be the same again. Days passed in a terrifying silence. Brielle didn't go to work, calling Mrs. Ramirez to say she was sick. She didn't leave the house, didn't answer the phone, only stayed close to the children, and tried to think through what she was supposed to do next. Ronan could tell something was wrong. He asked why she wasn't going to work, why she kept staring out the window with that worried look on her face. Brielle only told him she was a little tired and needed to rest, but she knew she couldn't hide forever. On the evening of the third day, there was a knock at the door. Brielle knew who it was before she even looked through the peephole. Damian stood there alone. No Victor, no bodyguards. He wore a black coat, his gray eyes fixed on the door as if he knew she was watching from inside. "Brielle, open the door. I need to talk to you." She stood still, her hand clenched around the doorknob, her heart hammering. Part of her wanted to pretend she wasn't home, but she knew it was pointless. Damian Blackwood wasn't the kind of man who gave up easily. "The kids are asleep," she said through the door. "I don't want to wake them. Then we'll talk on the porch. I promise I won't come inside if you don't want me to." Brielle hesitated for a long moment, then opened the door. She stepped out onto the porch, pulled the door shut behind her, and faced the man who had saved her life and yet frightened her down to the bone. Damian looked at her, and his gray eyes weren't as cold as they'd been that night in the warehouse. There was something softer there now, almost like worry. "You saw it," he said, not wasting a single word. "I saw it," Brielle answered, her voice harder than she expected. "I saw you order a man's bones broken. I saw blood. I heard him screaming." Damian nodded slowly. "You have every right to be afraid. You have every right to hate me for what you saw." "You're a killer," Brielle said bluntly, her voice trembling faintly. "You kill people." "I'm not denying that," Damian replied calm and even. "In my world, sometimes you have to do things normal people can't understand. The man that night sold information to a rival gang, information about locations, about my people, about transactions. If I didn't act, there would be a war. And in a war, innocent people die. Brielle shook her head. You're trying to justify violence. I'm explaining, Damian said, still steady. I'm not asking you to agree. I only want you to understand. Silence stretched between them. Cold wind pushed across the porch, and Brielle folded her arms tight against her chest, trying to hold on to warmth. There's something you need to know, Damian said, his voice dropping lower. About Garrett, about why I helped you. Brielle looked at him and waited. Garrett didn't just owe ordinary gambling debt. He owed the Bianchi crew $200,000. The Bianchi crew is my biggest rival and the most brutal gang in the Northeast. When Garrett couldn't pay, they started hunting him down. Damian paused. And hunting you and your children? Brielle's heart stopped. What? In the underworld, when someone can't pay a debt, their family becomes responsible. The Bianchi crew knew Garrett had a wife and 3 kids. They planned to use you as leverage, take you hostage, force Garrett to pay or work for them. Damian held her gaze. The night I met you at the gas station. It wasn't an accident. I was on my way to deal with something involving the Bianchi crew. When I saw you and the kids, I recognized you as Garrett Voss's wife, the man the whole underworld was searching for. Brielle's legs felt like they might give out. You knew from the beginning. You knew who we were from the beginning, I suspected. And after I got you to the hotel, Victor confirmed it, Damian said with a slow nod. For the past months, I've been protecting you quietly. My men have been watching this neighborhood. The Bianchi crew can't touch you because they know you're under my protection. Brielle sank down onto the porch step, suddenly unable to stand. For months, she'd believed she was living a peaceful life. She had no idea that right outside this small, charming house, a hidden war was being fought to keep them safe. You ever wonder why no one's bothered you all this time? Damian asked. Why your kids have been able to go to school in peace? Why you've been able to work without looking over your shoulder? Tears gathered at the corners of Brielle's eyes. She didn't know what she was supposed to feel. Grateful, terrified, furious that the truth had been kept from her. Damian lowered himself down beside her, leaving enough space that she wouldn't feel threatened. I know what you're thinking, he said gently. You're wondering whether you can trust a man like me? You're wondering whether I'm dangerous to your children. He stopped, his gray eyes turning out toward the night. I can't change what I am. I'm Mafia, and I'll always be Mafia. But there's one thing I can promise you. I will never, never harm you or your children. That's a line I won't cross. He stood looking down at her. You can hate me for what you saw. You can fear me. You can choose to leave. And I won't stop you, his voice lowered. But I won't apologize for keeping you safe. No matter what it takes, I'll keep protecting you. That's my choice. Then he turned and walked into the night, leaving Brielle alone on the porch steps, tears sliding down her cheeks, her heart breaking between fear and something else she didn't dare name. A week passed after the night. Damian came to explain everything. A week of Brielle living in constant turmoil. During the day, she went to work, took care of her children, smiled, and chatted with Mrs. Ramirez and her co-workers as if everything was normal. But at night, when the kids were asleep, she lay staring at the ceiling and thought about Damian. She thought about those steel gray eyes, cold when he gave orders in the warehouse. She thought about the way those same eyes softened when he played chess with Ronan. She thought about his words, that he'd been protecting them for months without her ever knowing. She thought about how it felt when he was near, that strange sense of safety she'd never felt with anyone. Lila asked why Uncle Damian wasn't coming anymore. Theo missed him and kept asking when he would come play with the toy ambulance. And Ronan, looking older than 8 years had any right to look, studied his mother and asked a question that left Brielle frozen. Mom, are you sad because of Uncle Damian? On the 7th night, exhausted from the war inside her, Brielle picked up her phone and called Damian. He answered after the first ring, as if he'd been waiting for that call all week. Brielle, I want to see you, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Tonight, alone, silence for 1 second, then his voice came through, low and warmer than she remembered. The South Pier. I go there when I need to think. Half an hour. Brielle asked her neighbor to watch the children for a little while, then drove to the waterfront. The winter night cut like a blade, but the clean ocean air made it easier to breathe. She saw Damian at the far end of the pier, staring out at the dark water glittering with distant lights from ships far away. He had no one with him, just as she'd asked. She walked up and stood beside him, and the two of them faced the sea in silence. The wind pushed Brielle's hair back, and she pulled her coat tighter around herself. "I've been thinking for a week," she said first. "I've been trying to figure out what the right thing to do is. I should be afraid of you. I should take my children and run far away from you in this dangerous world." Damian didn't speak, only listened, but I can't. Brielle turned to him, tears shining in her eyes. "I've tried to hate you for what you do, but I can't. I've tried to push you out of my mind, but I can't. I don't know if this is right. You're Mafia. You've got blood on your hands. You live in a world that's completely different from mine." "Yes," Damian said, his voice deep. "I am all of that. I can't change my past, and I can't promise I'll become someone completely different." "Then why am I standing here?" Brielle asked, her throat tightening. "Why do I want to see you even knowing all of that?" Damian turned to face her. His gray eyes weren't cold anymore. In the dim pier lights, she saw a sincerity he rarely let anyone see. "Because you see what almost no one sees in me," he said slowly. "You see the man behind the Mafia boss. And I," he paused as if searching for the right words, "you and your children make me want to be better. For the first time in my life, I have a reason to want to change." Brielle stared at him, her heart beating out of rhythm. "I'm not promising I'll become perfect," Damian continued, "but I promise I'll try every day for you, for Ronan, Lila, and Theo." Brielle's tears spilled over. She didn't know who moved first, maybe both of them at the same time. The distance between them disappeared, and then their lips met. The kiss was gentle and trembling, like both of them were afraid they might break something fragile. Brielle tasted the salt of her own tears on her mouth, felt the warmth of Damian's lips, and she knew she'd made her decision. A decision that might be crazy, might be dangerous, but it was her heart's decision. When they finally pulled apart, Damian rested his forehead against hers, his gray eyes holding hers. "I'll protect you and the children at any cost," he whispered. "That's my promise." Brielle nodded, tears still falling, but a smile rose on her lips. She didn't know what the future would bring, didn't know what they would face. But in this moment, beneath the dim pier lights and the soft sound of waves, she felt like she'd found where she belonged. Months had passed since that first kiss on the pier. Months of happiness Brielle had never dared to imagine. She and Damian were officially dating. Even though they kept it quiet from most people, the children slowly grew used to Damian being part of their lives. And even though Ronan was still cautious, the boy had begun to open up. Lila said Uncle Damian as naturally as breathing, and Theo clung to him every time he came by. Life seemed steady at last until one afternoon in May when Brielle's phone buzzed in the middle of her shift, the school's number, Miss Hayes. "I'm sorry to bother you," her son's teacher said, worry tight in her voice. "There's a man here claiming to be Ronan's father, demanding to see him. Ronan saw him and panicked, ran into the classroom and won't come out. We didn't let the man in because he isn't on the approved pickup list, but he's causing a disturbance at the front gate." Brielle's blood seemed to turn to ice. "Garrett?" she asked Mrs. Ramirez to leave early and drove to the school as fast as she could. When she arrived, Garrett was standing outside the gate, looking far more worn down than the last time she'd seen him. Thinner, paler, and there was something unhinged in his eyes. "Brielle!" Garrett shouted when he saw her. "So, you finally show up. Where the hell have you been hiding the kids all these months?" Brielle didn't answer. She walked straight into the school office and found Ronan curled up in a corner of the nurse's room, his face drained of color. She pulled him into her arms, feeling him tremble against her. "Mom, Dad came for me," Ronan whispered, frightened. "I don't want to go with him. I'm scared he'll hit you." "You're not going anywhere," Brielle soothed. "I'm not going to let him touch you. I promise." She asked the staff to keep an eye on Ronan for a little longer, then stepped outside to face Garrett. He was waiting in the parking lot, hands shoved in his pockets, a fake smile on his mouth. "Look at you," Garrett said, dripping sarcasm. "Dressing pretty now. New house, new job, and I bet a new man, too." "Huh?" "What do you want?" Brielle asked, forcing her voice to stay calm, even as something boiled inside her. "I want to see my kids," Garrett said. "I have rights. I'm their real father." "You abandoned us at a gas station in the middle of a winter night," Brielle said, her voice shaking with anger. "You took all our money, smashed my phone, and drove off without looking back. You gave up being a father the moment you did that." Garrett stepped closer, calculation glittering in his eyes. "I know you're sleeping with that Mafia guy. Damian Blackwood, right? The most powerful boss in the Northeast." He gave a harsh little laugh. "You think a court's going to let you keep those kids when they find out you're raising them with a murderer? All I have to do is make one call to the police, tell them about your Mafia lover, and you'll lose custody immediately." It felt like Brielle had been slapped. She hadn't expected Garrett to know about Damian, but I'm a nice guy. Garrett went on slick as grease. "I don't want to make this hard for you. I just need $100,000 and I'll disappear. I'll never come back. Never ask to see the kids. Never call the cops. 100,000 and you can have your peaceful little life with your Mafia man." Brielle stared at the man in front of her. The man who'd once been her husband, the father of her children, and she felt sick. He didn't care about the kids. He only cared about money. He wasn't here to be a father. He was here to blackmail her. "No," she said, clear and final. Garrett lifted his eyebrows. "What did you say?" "I said no," Brielle repeated, lifting her chin. "I'm not giving you a single cent. If you want to call the police, go ahead. If you want to take me to court, do it. But I won't let you blackmail me, and I won't let you come near my children." Garrett's face twisted with anger. "Who do you think you are?" "You're just some pathetic single mom I pulled out of the gutter. You're nothing without me." "Without you, I have everything," Brielle shot back, her voice no longer shaking. "I have a decent job, a home, people who care about me and my kids. And what do you have? You ran for months because of your debts. And now you're back trying to squeeze money out of your ex-wife. You're the pathetic one, Garrett, not me." She turned and walked away, leaving Garrett standing there, his face red with rage. Brielle knew this wasn't over. She knew Garrett wouldn't give up easily. But in this moment, she felt stronger than she ever had. She wasn't the trembling woman at the gas station anymore. She'd changed, and she would protect her children at any cost. That night, Brielle told Damian everything. She didn't hide a single detail. From Garrett showing up at Ronan's school, to Ronan running in fear, to the threats and the demand for $100,000. Damian listened in silence, his face unreadable, but Brielle could see his gray eyes darkening with every sentence. When she finished, he only nodded and said he would handle it. Brielle didn't ask what handle it meant. She was afraid of the answer. Days later, Victor called Damian and asked for an urgent meeting. Brielle was at Damian's place when Victor arrived, the loyal bodyguard's face tighter than usual. Damian motioned for Brielle to stay as Victor began his report as if he wanted her to know the truth. "Boss, we investigated Garrett Voss," Victor said, his voice grim. "He didn't accidentally find out about your relationship with Brielle. He sold information." Damian's brow tightened. "Sold it to who?" "The Bianchi crew," Victor answered. "He still owes them money. To erase his debt, he gave them information about you, about Brielle and the kids, about the home address, about the school drop-off and pickup routine, everything." Brielle felt the blood in her body go cold. Garrett had sold information about their children to pay off his gambling debt. Their own father had put their lives in danger to save himself. "There's more," Victor continued, his voice dropping even lower. "Our source inside the Bianchi crew says they're planning something. They want to use Brielle and the kids as leverage against you. Kidnapping, extortion, or worse. They're waiting for the right moment." Silence filled the room. Brielle looked at Damian and saw his jaw clenched, muscles tight beneath his shirt. His gray eyes were ice, colder than the night she'd watched him deal with a traitor in the warehouse. Where is Garrett Voss? Damian asked, his voice calm in a way that was terrifying. A cheap apartment in Newark. We've been watching him for days. Damian stood and walked to the window. Get the men ready tonight. We're going to take care of it. Number Brielle shot to her feet, her voice shaking, but firm. You can't kill him. Damian turned to her, his gray eyes not wavering. He sold information about you and the kids to my enemy. He put your children in danger. He deserves to die. I know, Brielle said, tears spilling over. I know what he did is unforgivable. I hate him for it, but he's still my children's father. He doesn't deserve to be called a father, Damian said, his voice cold. You're right. He doesn't deserve it. Brielle stepped closer and took Damian's hand. But Ronan, Lila, and Theo are going to grow up. They're going to ask about their biological father, and I don't want to have to tell them their father was killed by the man their mother loves. Damian went silent, his gray eyes fixed on hers. Ronan has been through too much, Brielle continued, her voice breaking. He's watched his father hit his mother. He was abandoned. He lived in fear for years. I don't want to add the pain of knowing his father was killed, no matter how terrible Garrett is, no matter how much he deserves it. I'm begging you, find another way. The room sank into silence. Victor stood frozen in the corner, waiting for his boss's decision. Damian looked at Brielle at the tears sliding down her cheeks, at the pleading in her eyes. Then he let out a slow breath, heavy and worn. I want to kill him, Damian said bluntly. He threatened you and the children. In my world, that's a death sentence. But I'm not from your world, Brielle said softly. I'm from the world where my children will ask where their father is, and I'll have to answer. Please find another way. Damian closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, his gray eyes were still cold. But there was something else there, too. Concession, respect. All right, he said. I'll find another way for you, for the kids. Brielle wrapped her arms around him, tears soaking into his shoulder. She knew she was asking the nearly impossible from a Mafia boss, but Damian had agreed for her, and that meant more than any spoken declaration of love ever could. Damian tightened security immediately after the meeting with Victor. 2 bodyguards were assigned to watch Brielle's neighborhood day and night. A black car was always parked a few yards from the house, and inside were men Brielle knew were carrying weapons. Damian wanted her and the children to move into his estate until everything was resolved, but Brielle refused. She didn't want the kids to know what was happening. She didn't want them living in fear. She believed that with this protection, they would be safe. She was wrong. On a Saturday afternoon, 1 week after Victor's report about Garrett, Brielle took the children to the park near their house. It was one of those rare, perfect days in June, warm sunshine and a gentle breeze. Lila wanted the swings. Theo wanted the slide. Ronan said he was big now and only wanted to sit on a stone bench and read his book. Brielle agreed, smiling as she watched the 2 younger ones run around the playground while Ronan sat beside her. Damian's 2 bodyguards stood not far away, one at the park gate and one at the opposite corner. They looked like ordinary people out for a stroll, but Brielle knew their eyes never left her and the children. Everything happened too fast. A white van suddenly tore into the park through a side path, smashing through a fence and barreling straight toward the playground. Brielle heard screams, the shriek of brakes, and the mother instinct in her exploded. She ran toward Lila and Theo, shouting their names. Lila, Theo, run. The van door flew open and 3 men jumped out, faces covered, guns in their hands. One charged at Brielle, another ran toward the children. But before he could reach Lila, gunfire cracked. Damian's bodyguards moved. The man at the gate shot the attacker who was rushing toward the children, and he dropped to the ground. The second guard sprinted in to face the other 2, and a short firefight erupted in the middle of a peaceful park. Brielle didn't have time to think. She grabbed Lila, who was screaming, yanked Theo into her arms, and ran toward the trees to find cover. Ronan ran behind her, his face white, but he didn't cry. He only ran. In the chaos, Theo stumbled. The 4-year-old hit his forehead on the sharp edge of a concrete flower bed, and blood immediately spilled. Brielle screamed in horror, but she couldn't stop. She scooped Theo up, held Lila with one arm, and kept running while the gunshots kept snapping behind them. They hid behind a low wall in the corner of the park. Brielle held all three children close, her body shielding them like a living shield. Lila sobbed uncontrollably. Theo screamed from pain and terror. Blood from the cut on his forehead running down onto Brielle's face. Only Ronan stayed silent, clutching his brother and sister, his eyes fixed on nothing. Minutes later, the shooting stopped. Brielle heard police sirens in the distance, people yelling for an ambulance, and then the familiar voice of one of the guards. "Miss Brielle, it's safe now. You can come out." Brielle didn't believe it right away. She waited a few more seconds, then slowly stood, still holding the children tight. The park looked like a battlefield. The white van sat abandoned in the middle of the playground. Two attackers lay motionless on the ground. The third was being restrained by the bodyguards. People around them were running in panic, children crying everywhere. An ambulance arrived quickly. Paramedics checked Theo and confirmed the cut on his forehead was only a surface scrape, not dangerous, but it needed to be cleaned, bandaged, and watched. Lila still couldn't stop crying, clinging to her mother and refusing to let go. And Ronan sat in silence on the stone bench, his eyes empty, staring at the ground. Brielle sat down beside her oldest child and pulled him into her arms. And that was when Ronan finally broke. Tears streamed down his cheeks, his shoulders shaking in waves. "I'm sorry, Mom," Ronan sobbed. "I'm sorry. I couldn't protect them. I'm the big brother, and I couldn't protect anybody. I'm useless." Brielle held him tighter, tears spilling from her own eyes. "This isn't your fault, Ronan. It never is. You're only 8. Protecting your brother and sister is my job, not yours." "But I want to protect everyone," Ronan cried. "I want to be strong like Uncle Damian. I don't want anyone to hurt anymore." Brielle couldn't find words. She only held her son tighter. She watched as Lila was soothed by the paramedics, watched Theo's forehead being wrapped, and she knew everything had changed. They weren't safe anymore, and she couldn't keep pretending their life was still normal. Damian arrived at the hospital soon after the attack. Brielle didn't know who had called him. Maybe the bodyguards, maybe Victor. But the moment she saw him step through the emergency room doors, she understood the real storm was about to begin. He didn't run. He didn't rush. Yet every step carried the weight of fury boiling beneath the surface. Nurses and doctors instinctively moved aside as he passed, as if they could feel something dangerous radiating from him. He stopped at Theo's bed. The 4-year-old lay there with a white bandage wrapped around his forehead, his eyes still red from crying, but calmer now after the pain medicine. Lila sat close beside him, gripping Theo's hand and refusing to let go. Ronan stood in the corner of the room, his face still as pale as it had been in the park. Damian said nothing. He only stood there and looked at the injury on Theo's forehead, at the gauze stained with a little blood, at the young face slipping into exhausted sleep. Brielle watched him and saw what very few people ever saw in the powerful Mafia boss. His gray eyes were no longer blank and indifferent. They were cold, yes, but it was the cold of a blizzard about to sweep through and destroy everything in its path. Lila whispered his name, her voice still trembling, and told him that Theo hurt. Damian bent down and gently smoothed her hair. Would be all right, and that she was a good thing. 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 She was a good would be all right, and that she was a good girl. Then he straightened and turned to Victor, waiting by the door. One short nod was enough. Victor understood and stepped out. Damian followed, but before leaving the room, he looked back at Brielle and told her to stay with the children and that he would be back. Brielle nodded. She didn't ask where he was going or what he meant to do. She knew, and this time, she didn't stop him. Out in the hospital corridor, Damian gave Victor his orders in a voice so even it was frightening. People who didn't know him would have thought he was calm. Victor knew better. When the boss spoke softly like that, someone was about to pay dearly. Damian told him to find Garrett Voss, and he wanted Garrett on his knees in front of him within a day. Victor said he understood. Damian added that he wanted the Bianchi crew as well. He wanted to know who ordered the attack, names, addresses, everything tonight. Victor nodded and disappeared into the elevator. Damian stayed behind alone in the quiet hallway, gray eyes fixed on the glass where the last light of dusk was dying. In his career, he had faced countless enemies, survived countless hidden wars, lost family, lost friends, lost men. But he had never felt rage this pure. Not once, because this was no longer about territory or money. This was his family. Brielle, Ronan, Lila, Theo. They were his, and anyone who touched them had to die. Hours later, Garrett Voss was brought before Damian. He was tied to a chair in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Newark. His face bruised from trying to fight when they grabbed him. When he saw Damian enter, Garrett shook like an animal cornered, his mouth spilling out, stuttering, "Please." He swore he didn't know they would attack the children. He swore he didn't know. He said he only gave them information to erase his debt, and he never believed they would do it. Damian said nothing. He only stood there and looked at Garrett with the eyes of a man who had decided another man's fate long ago. Garrett begged again, saying he could give information on the Bianchi crew, that he knew things, that he could help. Damian finally spoke, his voice as cold as a blade, and told him to talk. Garrett confessed everything. The name of the one who gave the order, the location of their headquarters, the under-the-table deals, the future plans. He poured it out like a machine, too terrified to hold anything back, clinging to the hope of staying alive. When Garrett finished, Damian turned to Victor and told him to confirm it. Victor nodded, stepped out to make calls, then returned minutes later and said it was accurate and they could use it to destroy the Bianchi crew. Damian nodded slowly. Then he looked at Garrett, shaking in the chair, tears and snot running together down his face. Damian told him calmly that Garrett knew he deserved to die for what he had done. He had sold information about his wife and children to an enemy. He had put 3 innocent children's lives in danger. The youngest had been hurt because of him. Garrett broke into loud sobs and begged, saying he would do anything and pleading not to be killed. Damian was silent for a long moment. He thought of Brielle begging him that night. He thought of Ronan, the boy who would grow up and ask about his biological father. He thought of the promise he had made to the woman he loved. At last, Damian told Garrett he would not die. Garrett lifted his head, hope flashing across his face. Damian continued, saying Garrett would not live a normal life either. He turned to Victor and told him to contact their people at the FBI to say he had a rat willing to confess everything about the Bianchi crew in exchange for witness protection. Garrett Voss would disappear from Brielle and the children's lives forever. He would not be allowed to contact them. He would not be allowed to know where they were. He would not be allowed to appear within 1,000 miles. If he violated it, the deal ended and Damian would find him. Victor said he understood. Damian looked at Garrett one last time and told him he was alive because Brielle had asked for it because she did not want the children to grow up knowing their father was killed. But Garrett needed to remember this. He did not deserve that kindness, and if Damian ever saw his face again, no one would be able to save him. Then Damian turned and walked out, leaving Garrett sobbing in the chair, knowing he had escaped death and lost everything all at once. Weeks after the attack at the park, the Bianchi crew pulled back from the northeast after the FBI raided their main headquarters using the information Garrett provided. Senior members were arrested, including the boss himself, Lorenzo Conti. The underworld was shaken by the collapse of one of the most powerful gangs, and everyone knew who stood behind it. Damian Blackwood hadn't only protected his family, he'd eliminated his biggest enemy without firing a single shot, and Garrett Voss had vanished into witness protection, taken somewhere no one knew, given a new identity and a new life. He would never be allowed to contact Brielle or the children again. To the kids, their father had disappeared, not because he died, but because he had to pay for what he'd done. Brielle and the children moved into Damian's oceanfront estate as soon as they left the hospital. Damian wouldn't allow them to return to the little house in Hoboken, at least not until he was certain every threat had been completely erased. The estate sat on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic with massive glass walls that welcomed sunlight and the constant hush of waves day and night. It was a place Damian rarely used, but he wanted Brielle and the children to have somewhere safe and quiet to recover from what had happened. Lila and Theo adapted quickly to the new surroundings. To them, it felt like a long vacation. Lila ran along the private beach, built sandcastles, and collected seashells. Theo, the wound on his forehead healed now with only a small scar left behind, stayed busy exploring every corner of the enormous house with the endless curiosity of a 4-year-old. But Ronan was different. The 8-year-old became quieter than ever. After Lila and Theo were asleep, Ronan went to Damian's study. He stood in the doorway, hesitated for a long moment, then knocked softly. Damian had been reading documents, but he set them down immediately when he saw the boy. "Ronan, come in." Ronan stepped inside and stood in front of Damian's desk with a seriousness that didn't fit his age. He stayed silent for a moment, as if gathering courage to ask what he needed to ask. "I want to ask you something," Ronan said, his voice small but clear. "Did you kill my dad?" Damian didn't look surprised. He had been waiting for this question. He stood, walked around the desk, and sat in the chair across from Ronan so they were eye to eye. "No," he answered plainly. "Your father is alive." Ronan stared at him as if trying to read whether he was telling the truth. "But I know you could." "I know he did bad things to us. I know you were really angry." "Yes, I was really angry," Damian admitted. "I wanted to kill your father for what he did, because he put you, Lila, and Theo in danger, because of the cut on Theo's forehead. Then why didn't you?" Damian went quiet for a moment, then spoke slowly. "Because your mother didn't want me to. Your mother asked me not to because she didn't want you kids to grow up knowing your father was killed, and I respect your mother." Ronan lowered his head, his shoulders trembling slightly. "I don't know if I'm supposed to be happy he's alive or sad because he abandoned us." Damian placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You don't have to choose. People's feelings are complicated, Ronan. You can be sad and angry and miss him at the same time. There's nothing wrong with that." Ronan looked up, his eyes rimmed red. "Are you going to abandon us like he did?" That question went straight into Damian's heart. He looked at the 8-year-old with eyes that had aged too quickly. And he saw himself from years ago, a child abandoned by his father, a child raised on fear and doubt. "No," Damian said, his voice firm as an oath. I will never abandon you. I promise you that. You really promise? I promise on my life, Damian said. I will protect your mother and all of you. No matter what it takes, I'll be here no matter what happens. That's my promise to you, to Lila, to Theo, and to your mother. Ronan studied Damian for a long time, as if weighing whether he could trust him. Then, suddenly, the boy stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Damian. It was the first time Ronan had ever hugged him first, and Damian hugged him back, warmth spreading through his chest, a feeling he hadn't known he was capable of. From the doorway, Brielle stood still and watched them, tears streaming down her cheeks, but a smile on her mouth. She knew that from this moment on, Damian was no longer only the man she loved. He had become the children's father, not by blood, but by heart. Months had passed since the night Ronan hugged Damian in the study. Months of healing, of trust rebuilt day by day, and of a love that kept growing deeper. Brielle and the children had fully moved into the oceanfront estate. The small house in Hoboken kept, but with no one wanting to return there anymore. This place was home now, the sound of the waves every morning, the garden full of flowers, and Damian waiting at the breakfast table each day. The children had started calling him Dad Damian naturally, without anyone telling them, without anyone teaching them. Lila said it first. Then Theo copied her, and finally Ronan said it too, even though it took him longer to open his heart completely. Summer arrived with long, sunny days and a sky so blue it looked painted. Brielle noticed the children were keeping something secret. They whispered together and stopped talking whenever she came close. Lila giggled every time she looked at her mother. Theo bounced around like he was carrying the biggest secret in the world. And Ronan tried to act normal, but his eyes lit up every time Damian appeared. Brielle knew something was going on, but she didn't ask. She trusted Damian, and she trusted her children. One Saturday afternoon near the end of July, Damian suggested they take a walk on the beach. It was what they did most weekends, so Brielle didn't suspect a thing. She wore the white floral dress Damian had given her the week before, walked barefoot on the soft sand, and held the hand of the man she loved. The children ran ahead, chasing the waves and laughing together. "Mom, come here!" Lila suddenly called, her voice unusually excited. "Mom, come look at this!" Brielle quickened her steps, curious about what the kids wanted to show her. When she rounded a small, rocky outcrop and looked down at the stretch of sand ahead, her heart stopped. On the beach, spelled out in seashells and carefully arranged pebbles, were enormous words. "Marry us, Mommy." Brielle stood frozen, eyes wide, unable to believe what she was seeing. The three children stood beside the message, each holding a red rose. Lila was beaming. Theo was practically jumping out of his skin, and Ronan smiled with the pride of someone who'd managed to keep a secret for weeks. Then Brielle felt Damian's hand slip from hers. She turned and saw him dropping to one knee in the sand, a red velvet box open in his hand. Inside was a diamond ring, simple but elegant, catching the last light of the sunset. "Brielle," Damian said, his voice deeper and warmer than she had ever heard it more than a year ago. "I stopped at a gas station in the middle of a winter night and met a woman in a red sweater trying to protect her 3 little children. I didn't know that night would change my life forever." Tears began to fall down Brielle's cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. She only stood there listening, her heart beating wild. "You and the kids gave me something money and power can't buy." Damian continued. "A family, a reason to come home every night, a reason to want to become better. You saw the real me, the good parts and the dark parts, and you still chose to stay." He looked up at her, and his gray eyes weren't cold anymore. They were full of love and honesty. "Brielle Hayes, will you marry me? Will you let me be Ronan, Lila, and Theo's father, not only in my heart, but in name too? Will you build a family with me, even if our life may never be as normal as other families?" Brielle cried without a sound. She looked at Damian, at the ring, at her 3 children standing there with roses in their hands. She thought of the road that had brought them here, from that desperate night at the gas station to this moment on the beach with the man who had saved her life. "Yes," she said, her voice broken but certain. Yes, I'll do it. I'll do all of it. Damian stood, slid the ring onto her finger, and pulled her into a tight embrace. Their kiss tasted of happy tears and ocean salt. Yeah, Theo shouted, his little voice echoing down the beach. We have a dad now, a real dad. Lila and Ronan ran in and wrapped their arms around both Damian and Brielle, and they stood there as a family, all of them holding on beneath a sunset that set the whole sky on fire. The waves rolled softly onto the shore as if the ocean itself was blessing them. I love you, Daddy, Lila said, her face pressed to Damian's chest. I love you too, Daddy, Theo copied. Ronan didn't say anything. He only held on tighter, but Damian felt it, and that was everything he needed. Brielle looked at her little family, tears still falling, but the happiest smile on her lips. She had found her home, not in a place, but in the arms of the people she loved. Months after the proposal on the beach, the wedding was held in the garden of the oceanfront estate, the very place where Damian, Brielle, and the children had built their first memories as a family. It wasn't the kind of extravagant wedding with hundreds of guests people might expect from the most powerful mafia boss in the Northeast. Instead, it was intimate and private, with only the closest people there. Elena, Damian's sister, flew in from the suburbs to be Brielle's maid of honor. Victor stood beside Damian as his most loyal best man. Mrs. Ramirez and Brielle's co-workers from Fiorella sat in the front row, the same people who had watched Brielle grow from a panicked single mother into a confident, strong woman. Fewer than 30 people in total, but every single one mattered. Every single one genuinely cared about the bride and groom's happiness. The garden was decorated with white roses and small lanterns, a red carpet aisle leading to a floral arch where Damian stood waiting. He wore a black suit as always, but today there was a boutonniere on his chest and a rare smile on his mouth. His gray eyes never left the doorway that opened into the garden, waiting for the moment the bride would appear. The music began, and Lila came out first, holding a small flower basket and scattering rose petals along the aisle. The 7-year-old wore a white dress that flared like a little princess's, her hair tied with a sweet bow. Theo followed behind her, carrying a red velvet pillow with the 2 wedding rings on it. His face serious as if he were performing the most important task of his life, the 5-year-old took careful steps, afraid of dropping something so precious. Then Brielle appeared, and the whole garden seemed to stop breathing. She wore a simple but elegant white wedding dress, her hair swept up with a few loose strands softening her cheeks. No glittering jewels, no long trailing train, only the clean beauty of a woman walking toward the man she loved. And beside her, holding her hand tight, was Ronan. The 9-year-old wore a suit just like Damian's, his back straight and his steps steady. When Brielle asked if he wanted to walk her down the aisle, Ronan had nodded immediately. I'm the man of the family until Dad Damian officially becomes our dad, he had said, and Brielle had cried with pride. They walked slowly down the red carpet, Ronan gripping his mother's hand. When they reached the floral arch, the boy stopped, looked at Damian, then looked at his mother. I'm giving Mom to you, Ronan said, his voice clear and strong. Please love her and my brother and sister. Damian bent down until he was eye level with the boy. I promise, Ronan. I swear it on my honor. Ronan nodded, placed his mother's hand into Damian's, then stepped aside to stand with Lila and Theo. The 3 children formed a line, watching their mother step into a new life. The ceremony began with traditional rituals, but the most important part was the vows. Damian held Brielle's hands, his gray eyes fixed on hers, and he began to speak. Brielle, I'm not a perfect man. I have a dark past, and I will never be able to completely change who I am, but I swear I will love you with everything I have. I swear I will protect you, respect you, and stand beside you through every storm. You are the light in my darkness, and I will spend my whole life becoming worthy of your love. Then Damian turned to the 3 children and lowered onto one knee, so he was eye to eye with them. Ronan, Lila, Theo, today I'm not only marrying your mother, I'm making a promise to you too. I promise I will be the father you deserve. I will protect you, take care of you, and love you as if you were my own. From today on, you officially carry the Blackwood name. You are my children, and no one can change that." All three children cried. Lila rushed forward to hug Damian. Theo clung to him right after, and Ronan, the boy who always tried to be strong, couldn't hold back his tears as he stepped in to embrace his new father too. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant said. "You may kiss the bride." Damian kissed Brielle to the sound of applause and cheers, and when they turned toward the children, Ronan, Lila, and Theo ran to wrap their arms around both of them. The Blackwood family was officially born, built not by blood, but by love, sacrifice, and faith in one another. Years had passed since the wedding in the seaside garden, years of sweeping change, of happiness nurtured day by day, and of dreams slowly turning real. Brielle stood by the window of her own restaurant, watching the lively street outside, and she still couldn't believe how much her life had transformed. The restaurant was called Stella's Kitchen, inspired by the place where she'd started over, and it had become one of the most well-known Italian restaurants in New Jersey. Mrs. Ramirez had retired and handed Fiorella to a new manager, but she still came to Stella's Kitchen often to visit Brielle and taste the dishes she herself had taught her all those years ago. Damian had changed too. Little by little, he'd stepped back from the underworld, turning most of the operations over to Victor and the men he trusted, keeping only the legitimate businesses. He told Brielle he wanted time for his family, wanted to watch the children grow up without constantly worrying about enemies or threats. He was no longer the terrifying mafia boss. He was simply a father, a husband, a man who had found the meaning of his life in the arms of the people he loved. And the Blackwood family now had a new member. Mia, their 3-year-old little princess, with hair as black as her father's and eyes as blue as her mother's, was the joy of the whole house. The older siblings adored her, especially Theo, who was 10 now and still dreamed of becoming a doctor. Theo often played doctor with Mia, using toy instruments the way he once had with Damian years earlier, and she always giggled whenever her big brother pressed the toy stethoscope to her chest. Lila, 12 years old, had grown into a gifted young artist. Her paintings were displayed in school exhibitions, and one picture of the Blackwood family hung proudly in the estate's living room. In the painting were Dad Damian, Mom Brielle, Ronan, Lila, Theo, and little Mia, all standing on the same beach where Dad had proposed to Mom years before. Lila said it was the most important painting she had ever made because it captured the moment her family became whole. And Ronan, the 8-year-old boy who once trembled as he asked his mother whether Uncle Damian would hit her, was 14 now and nearly as tall as Damian. He was the top student in his class and had decided he wanted to become a lawyer. When Brielle asked why, Ronan answered with solemn certainty that he wanted to protect the vulnerable, the people who had no one standing beside them, the way his mother and siblings once had. Damian heard that answer and hugged his son tight, proud of the young man Ronan was becoming. One summer evening, the whole family sat on the porch overlooking the ocean. Mia had fallen asleep in Damian's arms, her head resting against his chest. Lila and Theo were arguing about a movie they'd just watched. Ronan sat reading beside his mother, and Brielle leaned her head on her husband's shoulder, feeling a peace she had never believed she could have. She thought back to that winter night at the gas station, when she stood in the dark with 3 small children, no money, no phone, no hope. She thought of the stranger stepping out of the black SUV, the gray eyes cold, yet choosing to save them. She thought of the long road from there to here, the hardships, the fear, the times they almost lost everything, and the moments of joy that broke through like sunlight. Sometimes miracles come from the darkest places. Sometimes the one who saves you isn't a prince on a white horse, but a mafia boss in a black SUV. Sometimes love isn't perfect, but it's real. It's sincere and it's strong enough to heal every wound. Brielle smiled and whispered to Damian, "Do you ever regret it?" Regret stopping at that gas station that night. Damian kissed her forehead. "It was the best decision I ever made. You and the kids are everything I need." And that was their story. A story that began with cruelty but ended with love. A story that proved that even when life pushes you to the edge, you should believe a miracle is still waiting somewhere. Sometimes family isn't the people who share your blood, but the people who choose to love you. And sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the beginning of the best thing. Brielle and Damian's story had ended, but their journey continued. Each new day was a new page in the book of life, and they would write those pages together as a family. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, tap like, and share the video with the people you love so we can spread these good values together. We want to know how you feel about this story. Have you ever lived through moments that felt hopeless only to find light later? Do you believe kindness and love can change a person's life? Leave a comment below and share with us what you feel deep in your heart. Every story you share has value, and it can inspire someone else who needs hope. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and a peaceful spirit every day. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you in the next video.